All right, welcome to our deep dive into Percival Everett James.
Ooh.
This was pretty neat because we're going back to that classic, Mark Twain's Adventures of Huckleberry Finn.
Right.
But there's a twist, and it's a pretty cool one.
Okay.
We're going to be seeing it through the eyes of Jim, the enslaved character.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's taking, something super familiar and turning it on its head.
It's fascinating how Everett does that, gives us Jim's perspective.
Right, like what's his take on freedom and family and just navigating that whole society, the racial divide and everything.
Yeah, and I think it really makes you think about, freedom
Totally.
in a different way.
Especially from, that time period, right?
Exactly.
And we've got a reading guide for this one,
Okay.
which is really designed to get a good conversation going about this book.
I like that.
Think of it like like a springboard into this whole world of James. I mean, Everett, he's got this sharp satire. And the characters, they're not just like black and white. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
There's so many layers.
Yeah, Jim especially.
Oh, for sure.
He's not just looking for freedom, he's also, searching for literacy.
And get this, Everett throws in historical figures
Oh, wow.
like John Locke and Rousseau.
No way.
Yeah. So that adds like a whole nother level of depth.
That's amazing. It's not just like he's name-dropping them.
No,
They're really part of Jim's journey.
totally. His intellectual journey, which is like key to his character. But let's take a step back.
Okay.
Let's start with the premise here.
Okay, back to basics.
Yeah. How does James actually challenge the original Huckleberry Finn?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is it changes whose voice is telling the story, right?
Oh, yeah. In Twain's book.
You see everything through Huck's eyes,
Yeah.
but here it's Jim's thoughts.
Right. It's all about Jim.
His feelings front and center.
That's got to change things up, like how we see the whole relationship between...
Totally, that power dynamic between Huck and Jim.
Yeah, especially because you wonder if in the original Jim's intelligence was kind of, downplayed
Oh, definitely.
to make Huck look better,
It makes you wonder, if you reread Huckleberry Finn after reading James,
Right.
would you see it totally differently?
Totally different light, right.
Yeah.
Okay, but the reading guide also talks about Everett's satire
Oh, yes.
and how brilliant it
Oh,
is.
it's amazing.
It's not just like, ha-ha, funny. It's like, whoa,
Right.
he's pointing out all these injustices.
It's that antebellum South, all those everyday injustices.
Yeah.
The cruelty, the hypocrisy, the slave owners
Yeah.
claiming to be all nice and benevolent.
Yeah, and he makes it like,
He twists it
it's just
enough
Yeah.
so you see how absurd it all is.
it's not just slapstick. It's like social commentary.
It is.
Give me an example. What's like a scene where that shines through?
Oh, there's this scene where there's a slave owner and he's praising Jim for being so happy-go-lucky.
Right.
And meanwhile, Jim's literally in chains.
Oh, wow.
Everett holds up a mirror to that, and it's like a funhouse mirror,
Yeah,
You see how ugly it all is?
that's so clever.
And it's not just something from the past, right?
Oh, good point.
We see that same kind of hypocrisy today,
Out of time.
just in different ways.
Different forms, yeah.
Exactly. And that's what makes good satire timeless.
Right.
It's about human nature.
Yeah. It's so...
It goes beyond the specific context.
It transcends, yeah.
Speaking of revealing what's underneath, the reading guide points out how Jim uses language.
Oh, right.
He doesn't just speak one way.
That code switching.
Yeah, he switches between this vernacular dialect and then, more standardized English.
Yeah, that really jumped out at me. What's the deal with that?
It's a way for Everett to show how language itself was a tool of oppression.
Oh, interesting.
Jim uses that vernacular dialect to fit in.
Right, so he doesn't seem threatening
Exactly.
to white people.
To white people, yeah.
It's like this performance he has to put on.
It is. It's linguistic performance for survival.
That must be exhausting,
Oh, totally.
to always be calculating how you sound.
Totally. But then when he's alone
Yeah.
or with Huck, you see these glimpses of, his real intelligence
Yeah.
and how eloquent he can be.
And that contrast really hits you.
It does. It shows how language can be a cage, but also a key.
I never thought about it like that.
Yeah.
That makes me think about how we all,
Mm.
change how we talk depending on who we're with.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, I wouldn't talk to my boss the same way I'm talking to you right now.
Definitely not.
It's amazing how relevant that is, even today.
It is. It's about how we all navigate different social spaces.
Right, totally.
But let's look at a specific relationship here. Huck and Jim.
Yeah. Okay.
Everett's doing something more complex than just like
Yeah.
a feel-good friendship story.
Their dynamic is way more nuanced.
It is definitely more nuanced than in Huckleberry Finn.
Yeah, they still have a bond. But you can't ignore that power imbalance
You can't.
because of their situation.
Yeah, and I think it's key to remember that Huck, even though he's a runaway,
Right.
benefits from white privilege.
He does.
And Jim, even though he's older, could be wiser.
Yeah,
He's still dependent on Huck.
that makes their relationship so much more interesting,
It does. It makes you think about power and privilege.
even within a friendship.
Even in a friendship, yeah. And James definitely doesn't shy away from the brutality of slavery.
Oh, absolutely not.
The reading guide talks about Sadie, Lizzie, Sammy, and Katie.
Right, those enslaved women and girls.
Yeah, they go through some horrific violence.
It's heartbreaking.
It is.
And it really shows you how that violence
Yeah,
was specifically targeted at women.
it was gendered.
Yeah, something you don't always hear about.
Definitely. And what's interesting is how Jim reacts.
Yeah, how does he deal with that?
He's deeply affected by it,
Makes sense.
especially by the suffering of the women and children. It shows his empathy
Yeah.
and makes his fight for freedom even more urgent.
It's not just about him, it's about everyone who's suffering.
Exactly. And that brings us to another big theme,
Okay, what's that?
the performance of race,
Ooh, okay, I'm interested.
particularly when Jim travels with that minstrel group.
Right. Right.
Yeah, the minstrel group is Everett's way of bringing in the whole concept of blackface minstrelsy.
Oh, right, with the makeup and the racist caricatures.
Yeah, white performers putting on that blackface.
I can't even imagine how dehumanizing that must have been.
Awful to see yourself reduced to that
Yeah, just to stare you.
for other people's entertainment.
Yeah.
And then there's this idea of racial passing.
Oh, right, when characters try to, like,
Pretend to be a different race.
yeah, pass as a different race. That makes you question, like,
It does.
how we define race. What does authenticity even mean?
It's a big question.
It makes you wonder if we're all performing our racial identities in a way.
That's a profound thought. It makes you think about how we present ourselves,
Yeah, the roles we play.
consciously or unconsciously.
Yeah, I like that.
And speaking of roles, there's a clear connection in James between his quest for freedom and wanting to learn to read.
Oh, right. He's not just running.
No, he's learning. He wants literacy.
He wants to read and write?
The reading guide even says to pay attention to the texts he reads
Oh,
and the characters who teach him.
Okay.
For him, literacy is more than a skill.
It's like a pathway.
It's a way to express himself,
Yeah.
to challenge the norms that are keeping him enslaved.
It's empowerment.
It is.
It's a key to, like,
to unlock his potential.
yeah, his full potential.
As a human being.
And it's cool how Everett brings in figures like John Locke and Rousseau.
Those Enlightenment thinkers.
Yeah, so he's not just learning to read.
You're right.
He's also grappling with these huge ideas
Exactly.
about freedom and individual liberty.
It's like Everett's showing that even in slavery, that desire for knowledge
Couldn't be stopped.
couldn't be extinguished.
But the reading guide also mentions religion and superstition.
Yeah, what about that?
I think those things really reflect what it was like back then.
The cultural landscape.
Yeah, religion gave people comfort,
Yeah.
and superstition was a way to explain things they didn't understand.
And both of those things could be used for control
Ooh, that's interesting.
by those in power,
Right.
but also by those resisting power.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's a way for Everett to show how complex these characters are.
On the inside.
Yeah, their inner worlds.
And then, just when you think you've got things figured out,
Oh, tell me.
the reading guide mentions this shocking revelation.
A revelation.
In part 3. Ooh, we'll have to wait for that.
We'll have to wait for part 2.
I'm on the edge of my seat,
I know, right?
but it makes you want to go back and reread,
Totally.
looking for clues.
Right, like, did I miss something?
Exactly.
But we'll keep our listeners in suspense for now.
All right, sounds good.
And we'll dive into that in part 2.
Can't wait. Welcome back. Are you ready for that shocking revelation?
Oh, I am. It's a big one, isn't it?
Huge. It makes you rethink everything you thought you knew
About James and Huck?
about their whole relationship. And you know what's interesting?
What?
The reading guide, it points out all these little clues Everett drops along the way.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's like he's setting it up from the very beginning.
So subtle, I didn't even notice.
It's brilliant. It makes you appreciate how carefully he crafted the story.
It really does. He's such a skilled writer.
He is. He manages to pull off this huge twist,
Yeah.
but it still feels true to the characters.
And to the spirit of the original.
Exactly. It's not forced or anything.
And that brings us back to something we touched on earlier.
What's that?
How Everett shows the humanity of all these characters.
These enslaved characters.
Yeah, without, like ignoring how awful their situation was.
It's a tough balance.
Yeah, but he nails it.
He does. He doesn't just focus on their suffering.
Right.
He shows their resilience, their strength.
Yeah, they're individuals.
Exactly. They're not just victims.
And for me, that's what makes James so powerful.
It reminds you that even when things are really bad,
Yeah.
the human spirit can survive.
It can find a way.
It can thrive even.
It makes you think, who stands out to you the most?
Oh, that's a tough one.
I know, there are so many great characters.
James, I mean, his journey, his determination, that quiet strength.
It's inspiring.
It is, but I also keep coming back to Sadie and Lizzie.
Oh, yeah.
Those women, they endure so much.
Their spirits never break.
Never break. They're amazing.
Those are the stories that stay with you.
They are powerful characters. Their stories show what women went through
Yeah.
under slavery, the specific challenges they faced.
Things we don't always talk about.
And through their stories, you see James's compassion.
Oh, yeah, he's not just looking out for himself.
No, he wants to protect them.
It's like a whole other side of him.
It adds depth to his character. He's fighting for everyone,
Yeah, all those who are suffering.
not just his own freedom.
We've talked a lot about the characters and the themes,
We have
but we can't forget the setting.
the Mississippi River.
Yeah, it's not just a backdrop.
It's practically a character itself.
The reading guide talks about how it symbolizes so much.
Freedom, danger, the flow of life, new beginnings.
It's a powerful force, you know?
It shapes everyone's lives,
Literally and figuratively.
and it reminds you of the history.
The politics of the time.
Yeah, it was a trade route, a dividing line.
Yeah, between states.
So much conflict and tension.
It's like the nation itself, right?
Exactly. The river mirrors those struggles.
And that makes me think about the title.
James.
Yeah, just changing it from Jim to James.
It seems small, but it's huge.
It is. It's like a transformation.
Like he's taking back his identity.
Choosing his own name.
Why do you think Everett did that?
Makes you wonder, what does it say about his journey?
About his triumph over slavery.
Maybe it's a reminder that slavery tried to take away his individuality.
Tried to dehumanize him.
But it didn't work.
It didn't. He comes out of it as James.
A man who's in control of his own destiny.
It's so powerful. And the ending, it really drives that home.
Yeah, the ending.
I don't want to give anything away.
Don't spoil it.
But it's one of those endings that sticks with you.
It does. It makes you think about what freedom really means.
And the legacy of the past.
And what's next for James and his family.
It's an ending that makes you think.
Which is fitting.
For a book that makes you rethink so much.
About history, race, perspective.
That idea of perspective, it brings us back to the reading guide.
Right.
It suggests we imagine other classic stories.
From a different point of view.
From a marginalized character's point of view.
It's such an interesting idea. Why do you think that's important?
It challenges those dominant narratives we're used to.
The ones we just accept without thinking.
History, literature, even our everyday conversations.
They all have a specific perspective.
And sometimes voices get left out.
Silenced, overlooked.
Whose stories are we not hearing?
It's a call to be more mindful.
To actively seek out those other perspectives.
Because if we only hear one side,
we're missing the whole picture.
and that's what James does.
It shows us a different side of a story we thought we knew.
And that changes how we see things.
It can change how we see history, current events, each other.
What do you think would happen if we all did that?
If we all listened more deeply,
Sought out those unheard voices.
I think we'd be more empathetic,
More open-minded.
more aware of how power works.
And we'd be better people.
I think so when we see the humanity in everyone.
No matter who they are.
It creates a more just world.
A more compassionate world.
And that's the legacy of James.
It's more than a retelling.
It's a challenge.
An invitation to think differently.
To embrace empathy.
To question everything.
So, to our listeners, as we finish up this deep dive,
Yeah.
we leave you with this. Whose story do you want to tell?
Whose perspective needs to be heard.
Because, like Percival Everett showed us, those other stories, those other voices,
They can change the world.
they can make it a better place. Thank you for listening.
And go check out James.
You won't regret it.
Back for the final part of our deep dive into James. I feel like we've really gone deep.
You have. It's been great. So many important themes.
Way beyond the book itself, even.
Exactly. It makes you think.
I keep coming back to that idea from the reading guide about reimagining those classic stories.
Oh, right. From a different perspective.
Yeah, like whose story isn't being told?
It makes you wonder.
What do you think is so important about that exercise?
Well, it's like it challenges those narratives we're so used to.
Yeah, the ones we just accept as truth.
Like history, literature, even just everyday conversations.
They all come from a certain point of view.
And sometimes voices are left out.
They're silenced or just ignored completely.
It's like whose stories are missing? Whose experiences haven't we heard?
It makes you want to be more aware.
More mindful.
Yeah, to actually seek out those other perspectives.
Because if you only hear one side of the story...
You're missing the whole picture.
Exactly, and James does that so well.
It really does.
It takes something familiar and flips it.
Turns it on its head.
Makes you see it in a whole new light.
And that idea of changing your perspective,
It can change everything.
how we see history, current events.
Even how we treat each other.
What if we all made a conscious effort to listen to those unheard voices?
To try to understand those different experiences?
Would that change the world?
I think so. We'd be more empathetic.
More open to different ideas.
More aware of how power works in the world.
And maybe we'd be better people.
Because when we see the humanity in everyone,
No matter their background.
it creates a more just world.
More compassionate, more understanding.
And that's what James is all about.
It's a call to action, isn't it?
It is. It's a challenge to think differently, to be more empathetic.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into James,
We have one final question for you.
whose story will you tell?
Whose voice needs to be heard? Because like Percival Everett showed us, those other stories, they can change the world.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.
And go read James if you haven't already.